The right to vote is a crucial human rights franchise, but it doesn't ensure liberty, and in some places it ensures tyranny. You follow what I'm saying? People often vote for their own destruction. Either they don't realize they're doing it, or they think the people who are banging the pots and pans and warning them about the sky falling when it really is are full of baloney, or they're convinced by mass advertising, or they're intellectually lazy and aren't really paying attention and are more committed to party than anything else. It could be 1,000 other reasons too. Maybe they like getting benefits from the government. Democrats are very good at that, bankrupting the country while they're handing out lollipops. But voting is not the same thing as liberty. Now, this may come as a surprise to people because you haven't really heard it explained this way. But voting is not the same thing as liberty. That's number one. Number two, representative government's not the same thing as liberty. It's crucial in a republic to have the consent of the governed. It's crucial to have the right to vote. But now I want you to look at your Constitution. What geniuses the framers of the Constitution were. You have a right to vote under the original Constitution directly for one house of Congress. That's it. For the direct election of members of the House of Representatives, the people's body. You have a right to vote for president and vice president, but the popular vote doesn't determine who the president and vice president are. The Electoral College does. For several reasons, including the fact it ensures that people from less populated states have representation. So there's a minimum of Electoral College votes that are handed to each state. Very, very important to keep the country united and to keep some level of harmony. But not according to the left, they want to get rid of that too. Of course they do, because it would ensure they have a perpetual victory at the ballot box. So voting doesn't ensure that there will be liberty. Representative government doesn't ensure it. So what did they do? The Senate was originally chosen by the state legislatures during the early progressive period, the early 1900s, which, by the way, also involved Theodore Roosevelt, to a lesser extent, but still, Taft, as well as, of course, Woodrow Wilson. It was the thing. And remember, when Theodore Roosevelt ran as third party for president after he had left the presidency, the nickname of his party was the Bull Moose Party, but the actual name of the party was the Progressive Party. I wrote about this also. I've written about most of it. I wrote about this also in Rediscovering Americanism and the Tyranny of Progressivism. In fact, he wrote a long piece for the New Republic back then, and he sounded very much like a progressive, aka an American Marxist, just so you know. So these people have, McCain used to be, that was his favorite president, just because of foreign policy, I think. But Theodore Roosevelt was a great man, but most of us would disagree with his political views writ large. Certain things we would agree with. But this is very, very important. So you have the right to vote. People vote in tyrannies. You have the right to representative government, which is very, very important. But you have tyranny by legislature in some places too. Tyranny by legislature. So all three branches, the judiciary, which we're having now, tyranny by judiciary, the legislature, and the president, of course. You can have a single person despotism. Jefferson talked about tyranny of the legislature, as did Frederick Bastiat. In other words, just these guys pass laws that are tyrannical. Well, they're our representatives, aren't they? You voted for them. But that's not the point. That's not liberty. And of course, a president who's selected through the Electoral College process, who could be a Joe Biden, who was quite a tyrannical president. So there's a couple of things that are very, very important here to understand that liberty is not due to voting. It's not due to representative government. That said, voting and representative government are key to a republic. Are key to a republic. Why? What did Montesquieu say? What did Locke say? What did Jefferson say? What did they all say? What's the goal here? Division of power. Division of power. So you're less likely to have concentration of power in an executive, concentration of power in a legislative, as they called it, concentrated power in a judicial. So you have three branches of government that are supposed to have relatively clear delineated rights, which they are, Article 1, 2, 3. They have lanes, in other words, lanes. There's some overlap, of course, but they're lanes that they're supposed to try and operate within. They're supposed to be guarding one against the other, that is, selfishly defending their own power. Then you have federalism on top of that. Such a brilliant system. That is, the central government, the national government, the federal government has powers that are limited. Now, its powers are strong, but that's it. They're not supposed to have more than they're delineated. The rest of the power belongs to, according to the 10th Amendment, the federalism, the states. But then there's the 9th Amendment, which to me is a reflection of the Declaration, which is about individual liberty. I love it when Thurgood Marshall, in an opinion, the others say the 9th Amendment is just dictum, it's just pablum, it doesn't matter. The 9th Amendment's the heart of the matter. You should view that as the reflection of the Declaration of Independence. So you have voting, you have the consent of the governed. These are crucial. But more crucial than anything, you have separation of powers. And then you have separation of powers between the federal government, this new thing they created, and the states. And the states. So power is divided, power is checked and balanced. The fight is to keep it from being centralized and to keep from what? The mob. That's why you only have one part of the Congress that's directly voted on, and that's why you have an electoral college when it comes to a president and a vice president. They were concerned about the mob. You see them in the streets. Concerned about them. They were concerned about one branch having enormous power, so they tried to address that. They were concerned about the way we elect a president because they had fought the most powerful monarchy on the face of the planet, the most powerful government on the face of the planet. And they didn't want one election to have the capacity to change the whole face of the United States and its governing system. So that's why they put in the Electoral College for president. It's also why they put in term limits for the House, 2 years, for the Senate, 6 years, and then later, because Franklin Roosevelt thought he was a dictator, the Constitution's amended 2 terms, maximum 10 years. They built the term limits into the Constitution. And so there's many barriers and many checks, and every one of them is under attack by the Democrats to destroy the voting system, and the barriers to fraud, to change the citizenry, to import, as I say, Democrat. I heard somebody on our favorite cable network, a host, say, the whole goal was to import Democrats. That's my phrase. But you know, what am I going to do? So that's what to import Democrats, and as the New York Times says, reshape the electorate. So you got to worry about the elected branches, right? When that's being manipulated, that's been changing. And then, of course, now we have the tyranny of the judiciary. My point is, you have to be resolute. We have to take on every form of tyranny. And right now, that form of tyranny is the judiciary. That's what it is. So let's take a listen. It's short, a little over a minute. Newt Gingrich testifying in front of the House Judiciary Committee, where Chairman Jim Jordan is running the committee. Now, he asked me to be a witness. The problem is I was doing my shows and I couldn't be a witness. But I said, one of these days I want to be a witness for one major reason. He said, why? To finally confront Mr. Raskin, who will not come on Blaze, who will not come on Fox, who will not come on my radio show. To confront him. Number one, say, what are you, a coward? You won't come on any of their shows. But number two, let's talk about the Constitution and really nail it down. I don't know if you can do it in that format. If you can't, so be it. I would still duke it out with him. All right, let's take a listen to Newt. Go.
I've been around long enough that I remember talking with Jefferson. And when I talked to Jefferson, he said...
Now, that's a funny line that he took from Reagan years ago. But anyway, go ahead.
You know, you simply can't have an oligarchy. And if you allow judges to be the final determinants, you, by definition, have left the people behind. and establish an oligarchy. I really think if you look at Lincoln, and if you read Fehrenbacher's extraordinarily detailed book on Dred Scott, Lincoln makes the Dred Scott decision the centerpiece of the 1858 campaign. And when Lincoln is very clear about this, think about Lincoln at Gettysburg, when he says government of the people, by the people, and for the people. He's not only referring to Southern slave owners, he's referring to the court. And he's saying, by definition, you cannot usurp the right of the elected officials. Now, if you read the Federalist Papers, it's very clear that the Founding Fathers thought the weakest of the three branches would be the judiciary, that it would always be cautious because it would always be subject to being overwhelmed by the executive and legislative together. And in fact, you all represent the branch the Founding Fathers most feared, because they assumed that the people elected by the people would have the greatest power.
Yeah, it's good you mentioned all that. Very, very important. And it's true.
For all this and much more, sign up for Levin TV.